The kingdom didn't notice when she disappeared. Why would they? The night before had been filled with celebration, music echoing through marble halls, glasses raised to alliances, voices praising the Alpha King's perfect decision. The chosen bride stood radiant beside him, draped in power and expectation, everything a kingdom could demand. Everything Liara Ven was not. By dawn, her room was empty. No broken glass. No sign of struggle. No hurried mistake left behind. The bed was made, the small space returned to the same quiet order it had always held, as if she had never been there at all. The palace moved on without hesitation. Servants continued their duties. Nobles lingered in corridors, whispering about the future queen. Courtiers debated politics, trade, and power like nothing had shifted, because to them nothing had. Liara had existed on the edges of their world. A quiet omega in the archives, someone who blended into ink and parchment, who spoke only when necessary and never lingered where she wasn't needed. Invisible, replaceable, gone. It wasn't until the second day that something felt different. Kilric noticed it first in the smallest way. A document placed slightly out of order on his desk. It shouldn't have mattered. But it did. His gaze lingered on it longer than necessary, a faint crease forming between his brows. Someone else had handled it. Someone less precise, less aware. He said nothing. By the third day, the absence sharpened. No quiet presence in the corridors just before he turned a corner. No subtle adjustments to his schedule before he realized he needed them. No steady, grounding silence that had once existed without demanding recognition. It was gone. "Where is the archivist?" he asked finally, his tone neutral, almost careless. The servant before him hesitated. "Which one, Your Majesty?" Kilric's jaw tightened, just slightly. "The Omega," he said. Liara. The name felt unfamiliar on his tongue, as if he should have said it more, as if he should have known it better. The servant bowed his head. "She hasn't reported for duties, Your Majesty." A pause. "Since when?" "Since the night of the selection." Something in the room shifted. Subtle, but undeniable. Kilric didn't respond immediately. His gaze drifted, unfocused for a fraction too long, as if replaying something he hadn't realized mattered at the time. A glance across a crowded hall. A presence at the edge of his awareness. "Gone." "Find her," he said. The command was quiet, controlled, the kind of order that didn't need to be repeated. The servant bowed quickly and left. The doors closed. Silence followed. Kilric remained where he stood, unmoving, his expression unreadable. But beneath that stillness, something unfamiliar coiled, tight, restless, insistent. He told himself it was routine, a missing servant, an unexplained absence, nothing more. But as the hours stretched on, the feeling didn't fade. It grew. By the fourth day, he stopped delegating the search. By the fifth, reports were no longer enough. By the seventh, the celebration banners were still hanging from the palace walls. But the atmosphere had changed. Tense, uneasy, because the Alpha King was no longer celebrating his future. He was hunting his past. And somewhere beyond the borders of his kingdom, the one he had never chosen, had become the only one he couldn't ignore. Kilric didn't sleep that night. Not from worry, not from fatigue, but from the gnawing awareness that someone he hadn't acknowledged, someone he had never truly noticed in the way that mattered, was no longer within his reach. Liara Ven had vanished like a shadow at dusk, leaving only a faint trace of presence behind. By the early hours, scouts were dispatched, their movements silent across the city's rooftops. Couriers fanned out toward the outer villages, questioning travelers, merchants, and anyone who might have glimpsed a lone Omega slipping quietly into the early dawn. Every moment he waited for news, The emptiness in the palace gnawed at him, sharp and persistent. Meanwhile, Liara was already miles away. She had traveled light, no possessions beyond what she could carry, no words to anyone who might recognize her. Each step she took carried the weight of relief and the unfamiliar strain of fear. Fear of discovery. Fear of being brought back to a world where her heart had been ignored, dismissed, laughed at. Yet even as she moved, Kilrick's presence lingered like a shadow at the edge of her mind. She couldn't explain it. It wasn't longing, not exactly. It was the recognition she had felt in the quiet moments of the selection, how he had looked, even for a single heartbeat, as if she mattered. That heartbeat had ignited a spark she couldn't extinguish, no matter how far she ran. Back at the palace, Kilrick studied the maps and reports. He traced paths she might have taken, noting terrain, trade routes, safe houses, and the hidden corners where an Omega might disappear. Every choice she had made was a challenge, and every choice she would make was a test he intended to meet. He paused, staring at the empty corridors she had once filled with quiet energy. His fingers tapped against the edge of the desk, slow, deliberate. A storm was rising, not in the kingdom, not yet, but within him. Because this wasn't about duty. Not really. It was about her. The Alpha King, ruler of lands, and people who obeyed without question, had found something that obeyed no one Liara's will. And the more he realized it, the more he understood. He had never truly possessed her, yet losing her had already cost him more than he expected. Outside the palace, the world continued in its normal rhythm. Merchants shouted, carriages rattled, wind whispered through the trees. But for Kilrick Thorne, nothing existed beyond finding her. And somewhere, far from the grandeur he ruled, Liara moved through shadows, unaware that every footstep she took was being watched. Not by eyes that could see her face, but by the instincts of a man who refused to let what mattered slip away, no matter the distance. Liara had thought the forest would offer safety. Branches clawed at her arms and dress, leaves slick with early morning dew brushing her cheeks. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of a small animal, made her heart stutter. She moved fast, but cautiously, knowing that any slip could betray her position. She paused at a small clearing, kneeling to catch her breath. The air was damp and smelled of earth and pine. For a moment, she let herself imagine freedom, not as a concept, but as a tangible thing she could touch. No palace walls, no expectations, no Alpha King's gaze lingering in memory like a phantom she couldn't shake. Yet even as she breathed in the forest air, a part of her resisted the thought of being fully free. Kilrick's attention had been different, not commanding, not claiming, but attentive in a way that made her heart betray caution. She had felt it in the quietest moments, how his gaze had lingered, unspoken, unsparing, assessing and protective all at once. That feeling had haunted her more than any threat from the palace ever could. Her solitude was shattered by movement. Shadows shifted between trees, fluid and silent. Liara stiffened, heart hammering. She wanted to flee, but instinct told her to wait to see. The figure that emerged was unmistakable. Broad shoulders, a controlled gait, the unmistakable presence of power and certainty. Kilrick Thorne. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, voice carrying just enough authority to still her panic without anger. Liara swallowed hard, struggling to find words. I had to leave," she whispered, "before I broke completely." He studied her, eyes sharp but not cruel, catching every tremor of fear and resolve. "You think running keeps you safe?" he asked. There was no accusation in his tone, only observation, and something warmer, something that made her pulse quicken. "I couldn't stay," she admitted, voice quivering. "Not after that night. He stepped closer, the forest floor crunching under his boots. His presence was overwhelming yet grounding, like the tide pulling her back even as it reminded her of how far she'd come. "I didn't know," he said finally. "I thought you were safe. I thought you'd forgive me." Liara shook her head. "I can't forgive what I heard." Her eyes darted away, ashamed of the sting of betrayal she couldn't ignore. Kaelric's hand lifted slowly, hesitating, then hovered near her shoulder, not touching, just present. "Then don't forgive me," he said quietly. "Stay. Watch. Decide for yourself. But know this, wherever you are, I'll find you." A tremor ran through her, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing she was being sought not as a servant, not as a distraction, but as someone whose absence mattered more than she'd realized. For the first time since she had left the palace, Liara didn't run. The forest was no longer quiet. Word had spread faster than Liara expected, not her name, not yet, but whispers of movement, of strangers asking questions in villages that had no reason to matter. She heard it in passing conversations, saw it in the wary glances of traders, felt it in the way people watched her just a second too long. She wasn't invisible anymore, and that terrified her more than anything. By nightfall, she reached a small roadside inn at the edge of a trading route. It wasn't much wooden walls, dim lanterns, the scent of smoke and cheap ale, but it offered something she desperately needed: shelter. She kept her head low, voice softer than usual, coins counted carefully into the innkeeper's palm. No questions were asked. No interest shown. Just a key, a glance, and a quiet understanding that travelers came and went without stories. It should have felt safe. It didn't. Liara barely touched the bed before something inside her tightened, a warning she couldn't explain. The air felt wrong. Too still. Too watchful. A knock came at the door. Soft. Measured. Her pulse spiked. "Room service," a voice called. She hadn't ordered anything. Liara didn't answer. The silence stretched thick, suffocating until the handle turned slowly. Locked. A pause. Then a second presence shifted outside the door. Heavier. Less patient. Her breath caught. They had found her. Instinct took over. She moved quickly, quietly, slipping toward the small window at the back of the room. The latch stuck for a fraction of a second too long, panic rising sharp in her chest before it finally gave way. The door slammed open. Wood cracked against the wall as two men entered, their movements precise, coordinated. Not thieves. Not desperate. Hunters. Liara didn't hesitate. She climbed through the window, landing hard on the ground below, pain shooting up her ankle, but she ran anyway. Behind her, voices cursed. Footsteps followed. Too close. Too fast. Her lungs burned, vision blurring as the road stretched endlessly ahead. She couldn't outpace them. She knew that. But stopping wasn't an option. Not anymore. Not after everything she had already walked away from. A hand caught her arm. She twisted sharply, panic surging, but the grip that steadied her wasn't rough. It was firm. Familiar. Enough. The voice cut through the chaos like steel. Kaelric. The men behind her stopped instantly. Not from hesitation, from recognition. Liara froze as Kaelric stepped in front of her, placing himself between her and the threat without a second thought. His presence filled the space, controlled and absolute, leaving no doubt about what would happen next. "You're far from where you should be," one of the men said carefully. Kaelric didn't look at them. His attention was on her. Always on her. "I told you," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Wherever you go." His fingers tightened slightly around her wrist, not restraining. Anchoring. "I will find you." Liara's breath shook, not from fear. but from the dangerous realization that no matter how far she ran, she was no longer sure she wanted to escape him. Kilrick didn't release her immediately. Not after the men retreated. Not after the danger passed. His hand remained around her wrist, firm, steady, grounding in a way that unsettled her more than the attack itself. "You're hurt," he said, his gaze dropping briefly to her ankle. Liara pulled her arm back, not forcefully, but enough to reclaim space. "I'm fine." A lie. They both knew it. Kilrick straightened slowly, his expression unreadable, but something darker simmered beneath the surface. Not anger. Not exactly. Something sharper. "They weren't random," he said. "They knew where to find you." Liara's stomach tightened. "I've been careful. Not careful enough." The words weren't cruel. They were precise. She looked away, jaw tightening. "I didn't ask you to follow me." A pause. "Then you didn't have to." Her breath caught. The quiet certainty in his voice made something in her chest twist painfully. This wasn't control. This wasn't obligation. This was intent. Kilrick stepped closer, closing the distance she had tried to create. "You think leaving made you safer," he continued, his tone low. "But all you did was remove the only protection they hesitated to challenge." "I didn't need protection," she shot back, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "I needed distance." "From me." It wasn't a question. Liara held his gaze this time, refusing to retreat. "Yes." Silence stretched between them, heavy, charged. Kilrick exhaled slowly, something controlled slipping just slightly. "And did it work?" The question landed deeper than she expected, because the truth was no. Distance hadn't erased him. It hadn't quieted the memory of the way he looked at her when no one else noticed. It hadn't undone the single moment that made her feel seen right before he chose someone else. But she wouldn't give him that. "It doesn't matter," she said instead. Kilrick studied her, as if weighing the words against everything else. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her pulse flickered at her throat, the fact that she hadn't walked away this time. "It does," he said quietly. His hand lifted again, slower now, deliberate. He didn't touch her immediately, just hovered close enough that she could feel the warmth, the intention. Liara didn't move, didn't step back, didn't step forward. For a moment, the world narrowed to that single space between them. Unfinished, unresolved, dangerous. "They're not just looking for you," Kilrick said finally, his voice dropping lower. "They're looking for what you are." Her breath stilled. "What does that mean?" His gaze didn't waver. "It means," he said, "you were never as insignificant as you believed." The words hit harder than any threat. Because if that was true, then everything she had run from had been chasing her long before she ever left the palace. They didn't return to the inn. Kilrick didn't even suggest it. Instead, he led her off the main road, deeper into the woods where the trees grew thicker and the air felt heavier, quieter, but not safe. Not really. Just controlled. Liara followed, her ankle aching with every step, though she refused to slow down. Weakness was no longer something she could afford to show, not to the men hunting her, and not to the man walking just ahead of her like he owned every path they crossed. "You can barely walk," Kilrick said without turning. "I'm keeping up." "That's not the same thing." She didn't respond. The silence stretched until he stopped abruptly, forcing her to halt just short of colliding into him. When she looked up, his expression had changed, less distant, more focused. "On her." "Sit," he said. "I'm fine." Liara. Her name, spoken fully, deliberately, sent a sharp, unexpected shiver through her. Before she could argue again, he reached for her ankle. His touch was firm but careful, fingers pressing just enough to assess the injury. She sucked in a breath, more from the sudden closeness than the pain. "You're not fine," he said quietly. "I didn't ask for help." "No," he agreed. "You didn't." His hands didn't leave her. For a moment, neither of them moved. The forest seemed to hold its breath around them, the tension shifting into something heavier, something that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with proximity. "You keep running from me," Kelrick said, his voice lower now. "But you're not afraid of me." Liara's pulse spiked. "You don't know what I'm afraid of." His gaze lifted to hers, sharp and unrelenting. "Then tell me." The challenge hung between them. She could have said it, could have told him that she wasn't afraid of his power, his authority, or even the men chasing her. She was afraid of what he made her feel. Instead, she looked away. "You chose someone else." There it was. Simple. Undeniable. Kilrick didn't react immediately, but his hands stilled, the shift subtle yet unmistakable. "That was a decision for the kingdom," he said. "And I wasn't." Her voice didn't break. That made it worse. Kilrick stood slowly, the space between them widening again, but not enough to ease the tension. "You think that made you less important," he said. Liara let out a quiet, humorless breath. "Didn't it?" He stepped closer again, undoing the distance he had just created. "No," he said. The certainty in his voice made her look at him. Really look this time. And what she saw there wasn't duty, wasn't obligation. It was something far more dangerous. Regret. "I made the choice I had to," Kilrick continued, his voice quieter now. "But that doesn't mean I didn't see you." Her heart stuttered, because that was exactly what she had never been able to forget. Liara didn't respond immediately. She couldn't. Because if she spoke too quickly, she might say something she couldn't take back, and she had already given him more truth than she intended. "I don't need to be seen anymore," she said finally, her voice steady, even if her pulse wasn't. Kilrick watched her closely. "That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" she asked, sharper now. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you made your choice and now you don't like the consequences." The words landed. He didn't deny it. That unsettled her more than if he had argued. Before he could respond, a sound cut through the forest. Not close, but not far enough. Kilrick's entire posture shifted instantly, every line of his body tightening, focus snapping outward. Liara felt it too now. Movement. Controlled. Deliberate. "They found us again," she whispered. "No," Kilrick said quietly. "They were already here. The difference mattered. A lot." He stepped in front of her without thinking, placing himself between her and the direction of the sound. But this time, Liara didn't stay behind him. She moved to his side. His gaze flicked to her briefly, something unreadable passing through his expression. Not disapproval. Not quite approval either. Recognition. "They're not just hunting you," Kilrick said under his breath. "They're closing in." A figure emerged between the trees. Then another. And another. More than before. Better prepared. This wasn't an attempt to scare her. This was a retrieval. "You've been difficult to track," one of them said, his tone almost conversational. "But you were never meant to stay hidden." Liara's stomach tightened. "Who are you?" The man smiled faintly. "The ones who know what you are." The words hit like a blow. Before she could react, Kilrick stepped forward slightly, his presence expanding, cold, commanding, absolute. "You don't get to speak to her." The man's attention shifted to him, interest sharpening. The Alpha King." A pause. "Then you chose the wrong woman." Something in the air snapped. Kilrick didn't move, but the threat in his stillness was unmistakable. "You're mistaken," he said quietly. The man's smile widened. "Am I?" His gaze slid back to Liara. "Ask her," he continued. "Ask her why she was placed in your palace in the first place." Liara froze. "What?" But the man didn't answer, because the next moment, everything broke. They moved all at once. Kilrick reacted instantly, intercepting the first strike before it reached her. The clash was sharp, violent, precise. But this time, Liara didn't freeze, didn't wait, didn't hide. She stepped forward, grabbing a fallen weapon with unsteady but determined hands. Her heart pounded, fear and adrenaline crashing together, but she didn't stop. Because this time, she wasn't just being hunted. She was being revealed. And somewhere beneath the chaos, a single, terrifying truth began to surface. She hadn't ended up in the palace by accident. She had been placed there. The fight ended as quickly as it began, not because the attackers were weak, but because Kilrick was not. The forest stilled again, broken only by the sound of retreating footsteps and the sharp rhythm of Liara's breathing. The men hadn't stayed to win. They had stayed just long enough to confirm something. And then they were gone. Kilrick didn't chase them. For the first time, he turned to her instead. What did he mean? Liara asked, her voice unsteady despite everything she had just faced. About me being placed in the palace? Kilrick didn't answer immediately. His gaze searched her face, not for weakness, but for truth. That depends, he said finally. What do you remember? Nothing, she said quickly. I came to the palace on my own. I applied for work. I was accepted. That's it. Kilrick's expression didn't change. That's not how the palace works. The words settled heavily between them. Liara's chest tightened. What are you saying? I'm saying, he replied, his voice quieter now, more deliberate. No one gets that close to me without being vetted, approved, and placed with intent. Her mind raced, trying to piece together something that had never felt out of place until now. I was just an archivist, she insisted, though the certainty in her voice was beginning to crack. No, Kilrick said. You were positioned. Silence. Then why? It was the only question that mattered. Kilrick stepped closer, his presence grounding and suffocating all at once. Because someone needed you near me, he said. Close enough to observe. Close enough to influence. Close enough. His gaze darkened slightly. To matter. Liara shook her head, backing up a step. No, that doesn't make sense. I didn't do anything. That doesn't mean you weren't meant to. The implication sent a chill through her. Her entire life, every quiet moment, every unnoticed step, every choice she thought had been her own. What if it hadn't been? What am I? She asked, the question barely more than a whisper. Kilrick didn't hesitate this time. I don't know, he admitted. But they do. His hand reached for hers again, not forceful, not claiming, but steady, intentional. And that makes you dangerous. Liara's breath caught. Dangerous. Not weak. Not invisible. Not replaceable. Dangerous. The words settled into her bones, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. For the first time since she had left the palace, something shifted inside her. Not fear. Not doubt. Something sharper. Stronger. If they think they can take me, she said slowly, her voice steadier now, then they don't know me at all. Kilrick's gaze held hers, something new flickering beneath the surface. Approval, yes, but also something deeper. Something that had nothing to do with control. Respect. Then we make sure of that, he said. Not I. We. And just like that, this wasn't a hunt anymore. It was a war.